All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let's begin. A lot to do today. Today's daf is Mem Hey. We are picking up on Mem Dalid Amud Beis. And we are picking up with Amar Rav Chisda. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom. Like I said, a lot to do. So I'll say, remember again, we were dealing with a little bit of some beautiful Gemaras. About we ended off with the Talmid Chacham Roa Treifa Liatzmo. Amar Rav Chisda, Ezus Sonim Atanos Yechya. So it says Rav Chisda, who is the kind of person who despises gifts and will therefore live? So we'll remember again, he's quoting over here the pasuk from Mishlei. Shalom Malach says, 13 lines up from the bottom, 44b. Mem Dalar Mabeis. So we'll say, so Rav Chisda, remember, Shalom Malach says, Sonim Atanos Yechya. He who despises gifts will live a long life. What does that mean? Everyone likes gifts. So the idea is gifts are nice, except more often than not, gifts come with strings attached. And therefore, again, Shlomo Melech says that the best way to live is unencumbered. Right? The best way to live is untethered to another person. I don't owe you anything. When you get a gift, like it or not, there's a feeling ultimately, again, of beholdenness. Therefore, again, says Rav Chisda, what does it mean? So ultimately, again, Rav Chisda says, this is someone who, when it comes even to his own treifa, even though ultimately what he can go ahead and potentially come up with a svara to permit it, but he doesn't do that. So we'll say, if he doesn't take things for himself, even though technically speaking he could find a way to entitle himself for it, he certainly won't come to take things from other people as well. So the Gemara goes weiter. Any person will say who learns, generally Korah means Chumash, Shona means Mishnah, Roa Treif Aliatzmo, which we will say is the case of where a person has an animal which is questionable. And even though technically speaking I could find a svara to go ahead and be matir to permit it, I take the high road and I say no, I'm not going to partake of it. Shimish Talmidei Chachamim, and a person serves Talmidei Chachamim. We'll say again, this concept of Shimish Talmidei Chachamim is this idea that from our teachers we often learn so much by just observing their conduct than just the Torah that they convey to us. So Shimush Talmidei Chachamim means I serve a Talmid Chacham, I'm around him, I help him, and so I see his behavior and I see his attitudes and interactions. So we'll say about such a person, Allah v'kasav Omer, Yagia kapecha kitochal ashrecha v'tovlach. We'll say about such a person, it says that ultimately, again, Yagia kapecha kisochal, you will eat the efforts of your hand, right? Yagia kapecha, right? The efforts of your labor, you shall consume v'tovlach, and it will be good for you. We'll say, take a look at Rashi, last Rashi on the daf. Yagia kapecha kisochal, techevan da'al shalo eino chomet, kol shekin she'eino chomet b'shal acherim lignov v'ligzol. We'll say, since, again, even in my own stuff, I'm willing to forgo things which, technically speaking, I'm entitled to. Certainly, I will not go ahead and partake of that which belongs to others. Rav Zvid says, Zocha v'nochal shnei olamos. Such a person ultimately goes ahead and benefits from two worlds. Ha'olam hazeh va'olam haba. Ashrecha ba'olam hazeh v'tov lecha ba'olam haba. So we'll say, so what we're describing over here is really an incredible personality of someone who is willing to go ahead and forgo that which technically he may be entitled to, because he wants to adhere to a higher level. So he has this treifa animal. I could find this svara to be matirit. I'm choosing not to live like that. I'm choosing not to just straddle the line of mutter asr. I'm choosing to aim higher. The Gemara extols such a person because what begins as a behavior vis-a-vis my animal will ultimately spill over into other areas of my spiritual observance. Rabbi Elazar kev meshadrele mi bein asiya midi lo shako v'chi havu mezamnile lo azar. Rabbi Elazar, whenever they would send him a gift from the house of the nasi, he wouldn't accept it. And whenever they would invite him for a meal, he also wouldn't accept the invitation. Amar lei kaboy lo kaboy mar de ichi dichsif, and he would respond to the nasi, don't you want me to live? After all, the pasuk says, "He who despises gifts will live." So Rabbi Elazar wouldn't accept the invitation. He wouldn't accept the gifts because he felt if I don't accept the gifts, people who don't. Clinical tests have shown people who don't accept gifts live longer lives. Okay, at least says Shlomo HaMelech. Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera will say when the Nasi would send him a gift, he wouldn't accept it. But Rabbi will say when they would invite him to a meal, he would accept the invitation. Why? So Amar, top of Memhe, Amar Isyakurihu Demisyakrubi. He says, because when the Nasi invites me for a meal, I'm not really getting any covet out of that. That they get the covet from. They get the covet by hosting me for a meal. So Rabbi Zera felt he wouldn't accept the gift from them, but he felt that by accepting the invitation to the Su'udah, that was not the acceptance of a matana for him, because he felt the real beneficiary of that Su'udah was the Nasi, not Rabbi Zera. Good. We'll say back to Chullin. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Rav, Nikva Kanfa Mitztarfim Leruba. So we'll say ultimately again, the halacha is if the trachea, right? If the trachea ultimately is perforated, so we'll say this is talking about a case over here where there are multiple holes in the trachea. So if there are multiple holes in the trachea, those holes are mitztarif. And I will say we see if you put all those holes together, if the roof of the trachea is perforated, then halacha l'maisa you have a treifa. Master Rabbi Yirmiyah is a kashal ubigugoles sheyesh banekev echad aruch. We'll say in a skull. Again, we'll discuss the halachos of skulls, literally a cranium, right? In the skull of the animal, sheyesh banekev, if there's a hole in the skull, so right, even if it's one hole, echad aruch, afilu yesh banekavim harbe, even if there are many smaller holes, mitztarfim lemale mikdach. So we'll say we're going to see the shear for a hole in a skull is the size of a hole that could be made with aktach. Literally means like an awl or a drill bit, right? So, but now I don't know if the drill bit is the right term for drill bit. It's what you would bang with the hammer. So we'll say, so that's the shear. So the Gemara says, so we'll say, what do you see from here? Alma, kevan the shiurim alo miktach. So we'll say, so we see therefore what? That halach l'maisa, since when it comes to the skull, ultimately again the shear is the mali miktach. Therefore the holes ultimately again are mitztarif to the mali miktach. Hachinami. Let's see the same thing over here by the trachea. Kevin the shiuri ki iser l'chi mistarfin. But it says we're going to see the real shear for iser or the real shear for treifa by the trachea is an isser, is the size of an isser coin, right? Ultimately, again, so the Gemara says, so why don't you say over here that the perforations combine to form the shear of an isser? Ishtamite chada amra bichalbo, amra b'chan bar guria amarav. So we'll say he forgot the statement of Rabbi Chalbo, who said in Rachan bar guria, said in Rav, nikavim sheishban chisaron mitztarfen lechi isser, v'she'in bahin chisaron mitztarfen l'ruba. Oh, so we'll say what's interesting is as follows. Everything depends. See, what are we talking about over here? We're talking about a trachea that is perforated in many different spots. And we're talking about now the ability for those perforations to combine to form the shear of deficiency. Rav says it depends on the nature of the perforations. You both say there are two different types of perforations which exist. There's a nikavim sheshban chisaron, which means what? The trachea is perforated and the piece of flesh it was sitting in the place of the perforation is missing. That piece of flesh is there. Versus she'ein b'chisar, chisar she'ein b'chisar, which means what I will say. So you can have, if you poke a hole in something, the flap of skin could either be gone, or flesh could either be gone, or it's there, it's hanging, but it's there. So we'll say, I'm sorry? Chad? A hanging Chad. Oh, Florida votes, got it, great. A hanging Chad, got it. Okay, I have a one-track mind. For me, I'm all in Chullin from 5:45 to 6:45. So the Gemara says, fellas, good. So it says the Gemara, Amaras, and the kavim sheish ben chisar mitzarf from the cheiser, the she'ein ben chisar mitzarf from the ruba. So both say. So what the Gemara makes is a very interesting distinction here between the nature of the perforation. If it's a chisaron, if it's in the kavim she'ein ben chisaron, which means ultimately again the perforation, the flap of skin is still there, then ultimately again they are mitzarif to a shear of an iser. I'm sorry, just the opposite. If the skin is not there, then it's mitzaref to the shear of an isser. She'eni bahen chisaron. If ultimately again the skin is there, then what? Then they're mitzarefin l'ruba. Amar Rav Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Nitlei mena ritzua mitzarefes l'chisar. Both say there is a band or a strip of skin of tissue that goes along the length of the trachea. So we'll say if that band or that piece of skin is gone, nitla himena ritzua mitzarefes l'cheiser. That missing piece of flesh, I will say, although by itself that missing band does not make the animal a treifa, but it is mitzaref to the if there are other holes. It is mitzaref to the shear if there are other holes. Boy min Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani min Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Nikva kanfa mahu. So we'll say Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani asked of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, what happens if there is a hole in the trachea? So Amar Lei, so we'll say Hari Amru, we'll say we are first wide line Mem Ham and Aleph. Nekavim sheish ban chisar mitzarfen l'cheiser. So ultimately again, we'll say the truth is, Rashi give you a more precise definition. Rashi says kanfa is the gargeres saviv le'akefa nekavim dakim kinafa. We'll say, so the truth is, really, the kanfa, I'm translating it as trachea, really what it refers to are the rings around the trachea. It's the rings. So we're saying essentially those rings are really treated like the trachea itself. But again, to be more precise in our definitions, it's the rings. So the Gemara says, Sahari Amru, Nikavim Sheishan Chisar Mitzarfen L'Cheiser. If ultimately, again, there are holes, Sheish B'Chisar, where the flesh is missing, then they are mitzaref to the shear of an Isser. V'She'in B'Chisaron, but if there are no deficiencies, Mitzarfen L'Ruba. Ultimately, they're mitzaref to the shear of a rove. The Gemara says, you're right. What I'm asking is, ba'ofa mai. What happens in a case of a bird? That's in a case of like a cow, right? Or a behemoth. What about ofos? Am Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani lididi mifarshlei minei Rabbi Elazar mikaflo umanicho al piakona. So I'll say what we do is as follows. If ultimately, again, there's a hole, so what we do is we take the flap and we bend it over the opening of the trachea. Im cholfes ravakana treifa. If ultimately, again, the flap will cover the majority, meaning the flap which represents the areas of deficiencies, will go ahead and cover the opening of the trachea, then it's a treifa. Ve'im lav kshera. But if not, ultimately the animal will be kosher. Amar Apapa, and Apapa says the way to remember this is v'simonich nafya. The simon is, if there are enough perforations that it's like a sieve, ultimately, again, the animal will be a treifa. Nifchisa kidelas. They will say, what happens, is actually an interesting case. A flap. What happens if ultimately, again, there's a perforation, but it's like a door. So we'll say a door means what? So the entire piece of flesh is there. It's just flapping. So what's the status of that? We'll say ultimately, again, if it's large enough that the broad side of the Isser coin could enter it, then ultimately, again, it's a psul. Nistika. We'll say what happens in the case of nistika. So we'll say nistika, Rashi says, it's in the second wide line of Rashi. Nistika, la'arka, vikila mikulu. So we'll say this is ultimately, again, what if it tore ultimately along its length. So Rashi says, vikila mikulu, dehecha denifsak l'rachba beruba, mitoch sharei moshechas lemata, vatzara moshech lemala, nitak v'holich legamrei, v'lo hader chalim. Aval la'arka, kol kama shatzavar nimshach hastak soger v'holich hader chalim. So we'll say, so the shaila is, a tear in the trachea along the width is considered to be much more severe. Along the length, the Rashi seems to feel has a better chance ultimately again of healing. So what's the status if ultimately again nistak? Amarav afilu nishtayir be'elachulya achas lemala. So the v'chulya achas lemata kshera. As even if there's only one ring left intact on top and one ring left intact on the bottom, ultimately again the animal will be kosher. Amrua kamei Rabbi Yochanan. Amar machulya umachulya dekamarav. What are you talking about? What chulya are you referring to? Elaima afilu nishtayir ba elamashu lemala umashuhu lemata kshera. Rather says the Gemara, you're right. What it means is, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Hachi, it's 2, 4, 6 lines down in the wide lines. Hachi, kitikam Rabbi Yochanan, mashu lemala, mashu lemata. So ultimately, again, as long as there's something left intact on the top, something left intact on the bottom, ultimately it's going to be good. Amruah kamid Rabbi Yochanan, mishmeid Rabbi Yonasan. So they said this over there, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yonasan. Hachi amar luhu, yadin chavrin bavloi leferushe ki haitama. So ultimately, again, he said, do our Babylonian chaverim know how to interpret this Gemara like these interpretations? In other words, he was praising this interpretation. Tana Rabbi Chia bar Yosef kamid Rabbi Yochanan. Kalat savar kula kashel shchita. So we'll say. So now we get into a little bit more, leaving for just a moment the halachos of treifus, focusing a bit more on the halachos of shchita. So we'll say. So Rabbi Yochanan says as follows: the entire neck is kosher for shchita. So in other words, you can shecht an animal anywhere on its neck. So the Gemara says, okay, mitabas gidola. So, but what's the range? So mitabas hagidola. So we'll say. So tabas hagidola means the cartilage on the top of the trachea. So we'll say, so there's cartilage that surrounds the top of the trachea. So pretty much from that cartilage and down, you could go ahead and shech the animal. Ad kanfe hareya tachtona. We'll say this is very interesting. We know the trachea extends into the lungs. So in fact, interestingly enough, the trachea extends into, right, so the lobes of the lungs kind of surround the trachea. So it's interesting, what it sounds over here is as follows. Rabbi Yochanan says, you could begin, the upper part of the shechita could begin from the cartilage on top of the trachea, and it goes down at kanfei rea, until, kanfei literally means the wings of the lungs, because when you look at the lungs, it looks like wings, but it's the lobes of the lungs. Hatachtona, the bottom ones. So the Gemara says, Amarava, now if that's true, by the way, that would mean that what? That literally again, the area where the trachea extends into the lungs is no longer in the neck of the animal. That's further down. So to say that it means that you could shecht all the way to the bottom of the lungs would mean that you're shechting somewhere in the animal. So therefore Rava comes along. Amar Rava tachtona shehi al-yona. It means the bottom ones that are the upper ones, which Rabbi means that the Gemara is actually referring to when the animal is hanging upside down, like after you've shechted it and you're flaying it, so you could shecht ultimately again to the bottom of the lungs, which ultimately refers really to the top. So the idea being that you could shecht from the cartilage of the trachea all the way pretty much until the trachea begins to extend into the lungs. That's the shear for shchita. Shani Omer, kol sheposhetes savara veroa, or bilvat shelo tiranes. So we'll say, so the simple way to understand this is as follows. You can shecht anywhere on the neck of the animal, and the most extended neck of the animal. We'll say, when does the animal extend its neck most? When it's feeding, when it's grazing. So we'll say, so if you look at the animal, when its neck is most extended, that's the range for shchita. So which we'll say means, but you cannot manually further extend the neck of the animal. I guess if you pull, don't try this, but I guess if you pull the neck of a cow, you could pull it out even further. So the idea is shchita could occur wherever the animal naturally, or however far the animal naturally extends its neck, but not through you forcing it longer. So the Gemara says, what if the animal was ma'anis itself? In other words, what if the animal extended its neck? It pushed itself to extend its neck even further. Can you shecht in that extended area? Teku. The Gemara says, Eliyahu Navi. Yosef Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Nafak milsam b'nayu. Anas b'simanim v'shachat psula. We'll say, listen to this. What happens? Actually, a fascinating case. What happens if halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and you force the simanim up? So we'll say you manipulate the simanim in a way that simanim which are further down in the animal now are up in the neck area. So now there are simanim that are not really biologically, they don't belong there or anatomically belong there. You force them up and you shecht it on that area of the siman. Ultimately, is the shechita good? So the Gemara says, so Yosef Rabbi Yochanan Anas b'simanim v'shachat psula. Bless you. So ultimately, again, it's possible. Nikav hakana lamata min hachaza. We'll say, what happens if the trachea was perforated below the chest? Nidon kirea. Then I will say, ultimately, again, the trachea below the chest cavity ultimately no longer has the status of trachea. Rather, what does it have the status of? Lungs, which I will say is quite fascinating. What that tells us is, once the trachea extends into the lungs, the halachos of treifus no longer are governed by the laws of the trachea, but rather are governed by the laws of the lungs, which is very interesting. So we'll say same, I don't know, is the trachea an organ? Can I call that an organ? Good. So good. Same organ, right? Yet again, above the lungs has one status, and below the lungs or in the lungs has a different status. So the Gemara says, Ezuhu chazeh. So we'll say, what's the chest of the animal? Zeharoas akarka. This is the part of the animal which faces down. So ultimately, going to say the chazeh, right? The chest of the animal is the part of the animal that faces the ground. It goes lamata ad hatzavar. It extends up until the neck, and it goes down until the stomach. That's the chest area. We'll say when giving the portion to the Kohen, what do you give him? Chotech shtei tzelos mishtei defanos elech ve'elech. And Rabbi said, when figuring out the Kohanic portion, essentially you cut off 2 ribs of meat from each side, and that's the portion, ultimately, again, the 2 ribs and the middle, that's the portion that goes to the Kohen. Nikov krov shamoach. So also, again, the next treifa is if the membrane of the brain was perforated. If the membrane of the brain was perforated, then ultimately, again, the animal is a treifa. Rav Shmuel Dami Tarbahu. Karma ilo. So Rabbi Shmuel both said this, referring to the upper membrane. Afagavdelo inkov tasa. So I'll say apparently there's a membrane on top of the brain and a membrane on the bottom of the brain. Rav and Shmuel say the animal becomes a treifa if the upper membrane is perforated, even if the lower membrane is intact. Va'amrila adi inkif tasa. Others say no, that it only becomes a treifa when? If the bottom membrane is perforated as well. The way to remember this is that the membrane, Rabbi say, is really one membrane. Ultimately, again, it's like a pouch in which the brain sits. Therefore, in order for the animal to be a treifa, both the top and the bottom of the membrane have to be perforated. I will say, apparently, again, there is another similar case is with the testicles of an animal as well. The beitzim of an animal apparently also sit in some type of membrane. The bottom membrane, I will say, is very thin, and therefore it looks like it's part of the testicle itself. The upper membrane is thicker, and appears that ultimately, again, it's separate and distinct. Amar Reb Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Reb Shimon ben Mishum bar Kafra. So I'll say, the Gemara goes weiter. So first of all, I will say, just the way, you should know, just the way we paskin, is that in order for an animal to be a treifa, both the top and bottom part of the membrane have to be perforated. So Reb Shimon ben Pazi says as follows, Mishum bar Kafra, Moach, Komash shebekdera, nidon kimoach. So this is actually very interesting. So now we'll say for treifa purposes, what is considered to be the brain? So Bar Kafra says, anything that's in the pot, we'll say kedera in this case means what? The cranium, right? Anything that's in the cranium is considered to be the brain. Whatever extends out of the cranium, nidon kichut hashedra. We'll say interesting enough is considered to be spinal cord. So mehechan mascheli mashech, and ultimately, you know, say, so from what point does kind of the brain end and the spinal cord begin? Kimin is actually quite interesting. Kimin shnei. So we'll say, by the way, I just want to point out, just so you understand, what you'll say, who cares what's the brain, what's the spinal cord? So remember, again, it makes a very big difference for treifa purposes. The halacha by brain, by the moach, is even a mashu, nikav b'mashu, is a treifa. By the spinal cord, it has to be the rove is deficient, right? The rove is missing. So it's an important nafkamina. So we'll say, so where essentially does the brain end? Kimin shnei pulin amud beis. Kimin shnei pulin yesh munachan al pia kedera. So we'll say there are like 2 beans. There are 2 beans that sit at the end of the brain. We'll say these are the occipital lobes. Right? They look like 2 beans sitting at the edge of the cranium. That's the end of the brain and the beginning, ultimately, again, of the spinal cord. Yeshunachan al minapulin v'lifnim kilifnim, minapulin v'lachutz kilachutz. Rabbi say whatever is inside of the occipital lobes is considered to be the brain, and whatever is on the outside is considered to be the spinal cord. Upulin atzman eniodea. Well, so here's what's interesting. The lobes themselves, I don't know if they're treated like the brain or if they're treated like the spinal cord. So remember, again, I will say, the Gemara is not asking an anatomical question. The Gemara is asking like a halachic question. Do they have the status of the brain? And therefore, again, even if there's a problem, b'mash it a treifa, or is it like the spinal cord, and there's only going to be a problem if the problem manifests itself in rove? Okay, or mistabra kilifnim, but it appears to be clear that the occipital lobes are treated like the brain itself. Rabbi Yirmiyah badak ba'ova. Rabbi Yirmiyah went ahead and checked in a bird. Va'ashkach kimin shnei pulin. And he found these two beans, these two lobes. Munachan al piyakadera. Now, I will just point out that the Rishonim point out on this. Tosas actually already points out on this that this is a little bit difficult because birds don't have two lobes, right? Birds usually only have one lobe. I don't know. Maybe he found some type of aberration, or maybe he didn't. Maybe he thought he saw something that was two lobes, but was really one. Okay. In any event, I will say for our purposes, halacha lemaisa, anything inside the cranium is the brain. Outside the cranium is the spinal cord. The line of demarcation are the occipital lobes, and the lobes themselves are treated like the brain. For treifa purposes, nikev mashu, even a small hole in the brain will make it a treifa. For spinal cord, ultimately, again, it'll be a rove. Nikev halev lebeis chalalo. So we'll say weiter. If the heart is perforated, we'll say beis chalalo literally means in one of the ventricles. So ultimately, again, that will be a psul. That'll make it a treifa. So by Reb Zera, listen to this: lebeis chalal katan or lebeis chalal gadol. Are we talking about the small ventricle or the large ventricle? So we'll say the small ventricle is the right ventricle. The large ventricle is the left ventricle. So we'll say so when we speak about that there's a hole in the heart, in the ventricle of the animal, which ventricle are we referring to? Amalei Abaye, Mati Bailacha, what's the Shaila? Milo Tinan, did we not learn of Shimon Omer, Achitinakev, Lebeis Hasimponos. Remember again, we'll say by the lungs, so we mentioned this, nobody go into great depth with this, that ultimately, again, the animal is kosher until ultimately the perforation goes in to the area, Beis Hasimponos. So we'll say Beis Hasimponos means the interior part of the lung where there is a concentration of the bronchi. Ultimately, again, until the perforation goes to the large bronchi. Hachi hashta hasam lebeis hasimponos katani lehecha deshafchi simponos kulu v'hacha lebeis chalalo katani mali chalal gadol mali chalal katan. See what I say? So which the Gemara says. Ultimately, again, over here, it says lebeis chalalo in our Mishnah. I will say, once it says lebeis chalalo, what does it matter if it's the large ventricle or the small ventricle? Meaning the halacha does not seem to make any distinction between that. A hole in either of the ventricles, ultimately, again, will go ahead and cause the animal to be a treifa. Kana halev. So we'll say, what about the kana halev? So we'll say, Kana halev is interesting. Rashi says the Kaman Mefarish will see what this is. They will say what this is not is the aorta. This is not the aorta. We're going to discuss the aorta by itself. This will say we'll see what it is. So the Gemara is Kana halev. What happens? We'll say if literally again the kana means like the valve, right, of the heart. So we'll say, what happens if there's some type of perforation there? So Rav Amar Mashu. Rav says even a mashu will be problematic. Shmuel Amar Berubo. Shmuel says that it's the rove. Only if the rove is deficient, ultimately, again, does the animal become a treifa. We'll say first wide line mem hey and aleph. Hey miu kana halev. We'll say what is the kana halev? What is that? So Amarav Bar Yitzchak Amarav chaylev shal gabe defanos. This refers ultimately again to the fat that is on the defanos. So the Gemara says, defanos, what are you talking about? Defanos ela sha'al gabi dofne hareya. Ultimately, again, this refers to the fat that is on the sides of the lungs. So we'll say what's fascinating about this is as follows. At least in a behema, the way it works as follows is like this. The trachea, right, starts by the throat, extends down. You have the cartilage on top, extends down into the lungs. Inside the lungs themselves, when the trachea is there, the trachea is coated by a layer of fat. Right? That's what the Gemara is referring to ultimately again as this kana halev. Now the reason why it calls it kana halev, as we're going to see, is because another branch of that ultimately again extends towards the heart. There's going to be a branch off that extends into the heart. But ultimately again the trachea as it extends into the lungs is going to be coated by that fat. So the Gemara says, Elisha gabe dofne areya. Amra meimar mishved Rav Nachman. Talasa kana haver. We'll say, here we go. There are really three tubes. That's how I'm translating kana. If there's a better word for kana. Okay, three tubes that come down from the animal. Chad parish laliba. one extends towards the heart. V'chad parish l'reya, one extends towards the lungs. V'chad parish l'kavda, and one ultimately extends towards the liver. D'reya kireya, both say the tube which extends towards the lungs has the status of the lungs. The kavda kikavda, the tube that extends towards the liver has the status of the liver. The liba pligi, both say the tube which extends into the heart is the subject ultimately again of some level of machlokes. Some level of machlokes. Good. Some level of machlokes. So we'll say the novelty over here is what? That even though these tubes are ultimately, again, not part of the primary organ itself, because they feed the primary organ, they have the status of that organ. Which will say, for our purposes, means what? That whatever will make the primary organ a treifa will also make the supporting tube a treifa as well. Incredible idea. Mar Bar Chia Masni Epcha. So we'll say, Mar Bar Chia said a little bit differently. He said, Dereya kikavda. So ultimately, again, the tube, which, right, Dereya kikavda, the tube which feeds the lung is like the liver, right? The kavda kireya, the tube that feeds the liver is like the lung, again, and we're going to discuss this. The liba, the tube that feeds, ultimately, again, the heart, pligi, ultimately is subject to machlokes. So we'll say we will define what that means. So Reb Chia came along and Reb Chia bar Yosef, and he came and gave over this ruling of Shmuel before, this ruling of Rav before Shmuel. Amrale, he says, Ihachi Amr Abba. If Abba said this, so we'll say Abba is a reference to Rav, Lo Yada Betrefes Velo Klum. If actually Rav said this, I will say, if Rav said this whole idea, that ultimately, and he's referring to this second version over here, that the tube of the lung is like for this, and the this and is for the liver, and the liver is for the lung, if this is what he said, he does not know anything about trephus. Okay, so we'll say a little bit of Talmudic trash talk over here. So the Gemara says as follows. So we'll say, so again, obviously what Shmuel is saying through this, Shmuel is saying is, your version of Rav is corrupted. Because I do want to point out, remember again, that second version is Mar Bar Chia Masni Ipcha. What Shmuel is really saying to Rav is, you're wrong. The way you're quoting Rav is wrong. Because if you're quoting Rav that way, Rav doesn't know what he's talking about by trephus. And of course, that's not correct. He's calling Rav Abba. We'll say calling Rav Abba is a reference of what? Or is a term of what? A term of incredible reverence. So what he's saying is, Rav is my Rebbe. Rav is my father in learning. He knows what he's talking about. Your version must be corrupted. Good. Nishbar HaShedra, we'll say weiter. If the spinal cord is broken, then ultimately, again, the animal becomes a treifa. Tan Rabbanan, Chute HaShedra, Shenifsak Beruba. So we'll say, what happens if the Chute HaShedra? So we'll say the Chute HaShedra refer ultimately, again, to like the spinal tissue. What happens if the spinal tissue becomes detached, right? Because it's cut. So the Gemara says, Shenifsak Berubo. The majority of the spinal tissue is detached. So what's the halacha? So the Gemara, I'm sorry. Chudi HaShedra Shenifsak Berubo Divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says if the robe of the spinal tissue is detached, then ultimately again that is problematic. Rabbi Yaakov Amar Afilu Nekev. Rabbi Yaakov says no, even a little bit of the spinal tissue will ultimately be problematic. Hora Rebbe ki Rabbi Yaakov. So we'll say Rebbe ultimately again, Rebbe paskind like Rabbi Yaakov, that even nikev b'mashu by the spinal tissue will ultimately cause a psul of treifa. Amar Rafuna ein halacha ki Rabbi Yaakov. Rafuna said the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yaakov. V'kama. So how much of the spinal tissue has to be deficient in order ultimately for the animal to be a treifa? Rubo. Ultimately it has to be the majority. Amar rov oro v'amrile rov mocho. So we'll say, so some say, Rav says it has to be the majority ultimately of the flesh surrounding the spinal cord, and others say rov mocho. Both say rov mocho means nerve tissue. So we'll say, is this the flesh which surrounds it, or is it ultimately the tissue which surrounds it? Man damarov mocho, the one who says it's the majority of the of the nerve tissue. Kol shekain rov oro. All the more so, of course, if the majority of the actual flesh is missing, then of course it's a treifa. Leman dama rov oro, the one who says eating the majority of the flesh, rov mocho mai. What happens if the majority of the nerve tissue is deficient? Tashma the amar nivli amar Rav Huna Robo sha'amru, rov oro. The majority of the spinal cord, when it's missing a bosai, that it makes it a treifa, is referring to what? The majority of the flesh. So the Gemara says, sha'amru, rov oro. Moach ze lo ma'ale v'lo morid. The nerve tissue doesn't have any level of impact. Rav Nasan bar Avin Hava Yosef Kamei Rav. So we'll say Rav Nasan bar Avin was sitting in front of Rav. Badak berov oro, v'kabadak berov mocho. And also he examined the spinal cord, both the majority of the flesh to make sure that was intact, as well as the majority of the nerve tissue. Amalei, so he responded to him, Imrov oro kayim, moach ze eino ma'ala ve'ino morid. So he said to him, I don't know, we learned that if the majority of the flesh is intact, then what, Rabosai? The nerve tissue doesn't make a difference. Amar Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Nismarech pasol. Rabosai, if halacha l'maisa, if the nerve tissue, nismarech, became liquefied, if it became liquefied, or nismasmes, it became softened, ultimately, again, the animal will be pasol. Eizuhu hamerake. Look at Rashi just a moment. Rashi says, nismasmech pasol. Okay, masmasei pasol nismai pasol garsinan va'achut hashedra. So we'll say, says we're going to see. Rashi actually understands this to mean really the spinal cord itself, but it's really talking about the nerve tissue. So we'll say if ultimately again it's liquefied or it becomes softened, the animal becomes puzzle. We will say what are these cases of meracha and masmasa? Hameracha kol shenishbach kekiton. But we'll say that's if the nerve tissue spills out like liquid. If a mamish just purely liquefies, then ultimately the animal will be puzzle. Mimasme softened. Kol she'ino yachol lamod. But I'll say any case in which the animal cannot stand. Rashi says, ino yachol lamod mipnei shenaset salul. Avalo kokach shayin nishbach kekitan. So we'll say this is less. So the softening is less than the liquefying. Liquefying means it spills out. So we'll say softening means it's no longer strong enough to support the animal standing. Barab Yirmiyah, ino yachol lamod mekvedo mai. We'll say what happens if halacha l'maisa it can't stand because of its weight. Then we'll say, what's the halacha? Look at Rashi. Mipnei kavedo shu'av v'kaved avalon nisrachik mibifnim mahu choli uzeh shemachbida olav. So we'll say, what happens if the animal cannot stand up as a result of its own weight? Is that a deficiency in the spinal cord, or is that just some other non-spinal cord deficiency? Teku. To which the Gemara ultimately says that's a teku. We have to leave that for Eliyahu Hanavi. Be Rav Amri nismasmes pasol. If it was nismasmes, so we'll say again, the spinal cord became softened, it's possible. Nismasmes kosher. But ultimately, again, nismasmes is kosher. So we'll say, what's nismasmes? Rashi says, nistroken me'amoach mikzaso me'ilav. That will say, ultimately, again, Rashi is defining this as some of the spinal tissue just becomes softened. Meisver, Shimon Elazar Omer, behema shenismasmes, mocha treifa. So ultimately, Rabbi Shimon Elazar says nismasmes is treifa. So ahi nismasmes itmar. So actually, you will say you have changed the gears. That doesn't mean nismasmes, rather it means nismasmes. It was softened. Ini, is that true? Levi Hava Yosef Bemasusa. Levi was one time sitting in the bathhouse, and what happened? Chazya luhu gavra vitarya l'reishe. He saw a man in the bathhouse apparently slip and hit his head very hard. Amar nismazmes muchya dedain. Right? So, and Levi said, this man nismazmes moche. Right? Rashi says, nismazmes moche dedain doik haya alav va'amar oilo lazeh shenismazmes mocho. So Levi used this lashon of his head was nismazmes. So the Gemara says, lav delochai, wasn't Levi saying that unfortunately again this guy's not going to live? Rabbi lo lomar she'ino molid. Levi felt that he hit his head so hard that what? He was going to become sterile. So we'll say, interestingly enough, if you look at Rashi says, she'ino molid, toldos ha'ish min hamoach hiba. So we'll say, so obviously the ability to reproduce is ultimately, Rashi says, rooted in the brain. Ba shagit hanasha shal yerech v'git hagvia Kulan Michubarin. Then again, I will say, so I'll leave the anatomy lesson to the doctors, but ultimately, again, Levi thought that he had hit his head so hard that this would prevent his ability ultimately to reproduce. But again, not chas v'shalom cause him to die. So we'll say, so again, obviously you can hit your head hard enough to die, but that wasn't what Levi was concerned about. So we'll say, so again, what we begin to see, first of all, we'll say, when it comes ultimately, again, to the spine, so the way the Rambam paskins ultimately is, it's nismarech. If the spinal material becomes liquefied, then ultimately, again, that would go ahead and cause a treifa. The softening of the spinal, of the nervous tissue, or of the flesh, or of the spine itself, by itself, is not the form of a treifa. All right, so we'll stop over here for today. I'm going to share with you a short idea on the parsha. So we'll say, so we have the great schos this Shabbos 3 Parshas Bo, and of course in Parshas Bo we feel the great nace of Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says that any time you read the events of the parsha, it's never haphazard. It's never just we're reading a particular Torah portion. It means that ultimately, again, the events of that parsha come alive in our lives, come alive in our souls. So therefore, if this is the week of Yitzias Mitzrayim, this is the week of Exodus, this is the week of emancipation, that means even though it's not Pesach, we get to experience Yitzias Mitzrayim in some way within ourselves. So in one of the dramatic exchanges, actually before really before the Yitzhak, before we go out, so towards the end of the Makos, really right after the Mak of Arba. So the Arba comes, pretty much wipes out, financially decimates Egypt. So Paro says, go. Paro says, go. So what happens? So the pasuk says, this is in Perek Yud, Psukim Ches through Tes. Vayoshev es Moshe ves Aaron al Paro, Vayomer aleim, L'chu ivdu es Hashem Elokechem, miva mi'ahochem. So what happens? Paro says, fine, go serve your God. Who's going? So Vayomer Moshe. So Moshe says, "B'na'areinu u'biskeinenu neilech." Right? B'vanenu b'vnosenu b'tzonu b'karin neilech ki chag la'Hashem lanu. So we'll say, what does Paro say? Excuse me, what does Moshe say? Moshe says, we'll go with our young, with our old, with our sons, with our daughters, with our sheep, with our cattle. Ki chag la'Hashem lanu. And remember again, what does Paro respond? Paro says, no, that's not right. Lochein lechu hagvarim ki osamatem mevakshim. I don't understand. What do you need? What do you need? The old people, the young people, the men, the women, the gvarim. Young men are the ones who ultimately serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lechu hagvarim. Let the men go, because that's what you're asking for. So the Kajnitzer Magid says, what are they arguing about? So we'll say, it's interesting. First of all, if you think about this, what's at the root of this machlokes? Because remember again, Paro certainly knew about worshiping God. Why did he know about worshiping God? Because he made himself into one. So who did Paro want to worship him? Who did he want? Everyone. So what does he sing suddenly now in Avodas Hashem? No, just the men. And both say Gvarim doesn't just mean men. Gvarim usually means what? Young men, right? Young men. So what's the pshat? What's happening over here? So the Kajnitzer Magid, I will say, obviously, Al Derech HaDrush, says something so beautiful. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Paro, you don't understand us. B'na'areinu u'biskeinenu neilech. See, Rabbi was saying, this is not simply a request to go out and worship in God. This is our mantra. Says the Kajnitzer Magid, listen to these words. Kimo b'nu'areinu Kacha bizikinosenu neilech. Lefi hanhagosav b'shnos hanaurim. Kacha nieh b'shnos hazikna. Kol chayenu halicha v'skadmosem. Says the Kajnitzer Magid, Moshe Rabbeinu was proclaiming the mantra of the Jew. B'na'areinu u'biskeinenu neilech. When we are young and when we are old, we move. Rabbi say, halicha is the term for growth. Halicha is the term for moving forward. Halicha is the term for spiritual actualization. When does the Jew grow? B'na'areinu u'biskeinenu neilech. We grow at every stage of life. For the Jew, there is no such thing as plateauing. For the Jew, there is no such thing as saying, I'm good. I'm good. I think we've kind of gotten to the level we want to get to, and I'm good. We'll say every stage of life has to bring with it incredible dynamic growth. It's true, growth looks different at different stages of life. The growth when I'm an Ar is different than the growth when I'm a Zaken. But it says Moshe Rabbeinu to Paro, you don't understand who we are. See, what was Paro saying? L'chuna gvarim. Right, what is Paro saying? The old people. What do old people do? Right, what do old people do? Let them walk around with the walkers with the tennis balls on the bottom and Shalom Yisrael, right? Ganz good, right? They don't need to go with you, right? What are they going to do? And even the very young people, you need to take the children with you. And, excuse me, what do the women have to do with your avodas Hashem? To which Moshe says, you don't understand us. B'na'arenu b'skenenu nelech. Bivanenu ubivnosenu nelech, right? Even bitzalnenu ubikarenu. I will say, a Jew and everything that is associated with him always experiences dynamic growth. B'na'arenu ubizkenenu nelech. When we are young and when we are old, when we are children and when we are adults. And I will say, get ready for this. What is bivkarna bitzonenu? Get ready for this. What does it mean? My cows grow? No. But we'll say, you know what? Sometimes all I am in life is a cow. And sometimes all I am in life is a sheep. Because you know what? You know what all I'm doing in life? I will say there are some people, all they do in life is what? Graze. All they do is graze. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, a snack here, a snack there, a little grass here, a little grass there, a little flesh here, a little flesh there, right? And pretty much all I do in life is I eat, I breathe, I sleep. Sounds a lot like a sheep. Sounds a lot like a cow. Even if you're a bakar in son, you still have to go. You still nelech. There's growth for the cow, there's growth for the sheep. And just because you're a cow right now doesn't mean you have to be a cow for the rest of your life. You see, Paro thought that growth was the domain for the elite few. Paro thought that growth was the domain, ultimately, again, for the tzaddikim, the Talmidei Chachamim, the young men, those who possess vitality. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, you don't understand the strength of our people. Every single one of us has an obligation, has the ability, and has the destiny for growth. Ultimately, again, whether we are younger, whether we are old, whether we are children or whether we are adults, even Rabbi say, if we are not even actualizing our human identities, but all I'm doing in life is I'm a grazer. Rabbi say, so many of us just spend our lives grazing our way through. Even if you're a grazer, nelech, it's time to grow. It's time to become more. It's time to do good. And here lies the distinction between Am Yisrael and the Mitzrim. The Mitzrim also had people who grew, right? Who also had people who engaged in halicha, but apparently that was some select few. For Am Yisrael, no matter where you're holding, the ability to grow, the ability to progress, the ability to self-actualize is within our very DNA and is within reach. So I say we should be Zochem Yirtz Hashem to actualize this mantra wherever we are, whether we are young or whether we are old, whether we are human or whether we are cattle. May we be Zochem Yirtz Hashem to live a life of one word, Neilech. I will say that's the mantra, Neilech. Let's go, let's grow, let's become something great. Shabbos.
Now, would that please remove all your belongings from this?